G'day, folks. Welcome to another week of It's Just Not Numbers and a catch-up with Stevie Maynes. G'day, Steve-o. How you going?
Hey, I'm very well, mate. How are you?
Excellent. Yeah, good. Thank you. Good. Thank you. Now, we have had some IT issues. We tried to get this done last week, but really interestingly, today we're going to talk a bit about the property market. And again, everybody seek your own professional advice. This is just our opinions, but we don't believe all that glitters is not gold. And more importantly, it's not maybe the potential stemming pile of dog turds that the newspapers are trying to make it look like.
Exactly right. No, I agree. I mean, bad news sells, and that's there in that business of selling bad news.
Absolutely.
But look, over the last week or so, just been doing a little bit of research, and interestingly, I've just come across some historical data. Now, look, obviously, there's no guarantees what's happened in the past will happen in the future.
Yep.
But you've got to use something as a guide, and I think
absolutely that's an economic indicator, right?
Absolutely right. And it shows here that back in 1970. Now I know we're in Melbourne, but in Sydney, the average house was 18,700. Okay,
right.
Just back in 1970. By 1980, the average house had jumped to 76,500. So what's that about? I don't know, 4.5 times in that 10-year period.
Yep.
So I had a massive, growth period in that 10
Absolutely.
years. When you consider, when we're sort of doubling every 10 years, this is, 4 times in 10 years. So
absolutely.
In 1990, the average house price had jumped to 184,500. So it kind of bit over doubled in that.
Doubled again. Yep.
Yeah. And then in 2000, you needed 312,000 to buy a house.
Right.
So so you can see that it's the property market's been super strong in this country, and during that period, let me just explain a few things about what was going on with interest rates and inflation. And that's the point of our message today. We're going through a rising interest rate and rising inflationary period.
Absolutely.
So if you go back to 1970, the inflation was about a little over 2%.
Right.
And the average variable home loan rate was 5.88.
All right. So now, can I interrupt? You do a lot of mortgages. I don't.
Yep.
What's the average variable rate now?
Well, the average variable rate now would be, with the latest rise, would be sort of, just a little over 4% on average.
So not far from those sorts of numbers that we're talking about there.
Exactly. Correct.
Yep.
Correct.
Right.
And, and I think over the next coming months, it'll start creeping up towards those numbers.
Yeah. Well, and they're tipping those. And I personally think they're going to go too hard too soon. We're going to get to early next year, probably March, April-ish, and I reckon we'll probably get a decrease back. But I think they're still going to cook the goose between now and then. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think you're spot on. So 1970, inflation was 2%. By about 1975, 5 years later, it was tracking at 17.7%.
Shit.
So that was, I think, the years of Gough Whitlam, wasn't it? Buying a farm back and spending a lot of money. So, and interest rates had jumped to about a little over 10%. So 5 years they'd virtually doubled. Okay. And by 1980, the interest rates were sitting at 9.5% and the inflation was sitting at 10%.
Right.
Okay? So both inflation and interest rates jumped substantially in that 10-year period.
Yep.
And so did property prices.
Mm.
So, that sort of, flies in the face of what people are saying at the moment, that, due to inflation, interest rate pressures, we're going to see a sizable down pressure on property values. But if we go on what happened between 1970 and 1980, that was the opposite.
Well, and I think there's a couple of other interesting factors there too. We had, and we won't talk about the terms and everything, but back then we had a very limited immigration policy, might be a nice way to put it.
Absolutely.
We had the jobs summit a couple of weeks ago now. They're talking about making it 190,000 migrants that are going to come back into the country. Predominantly, they're going to be AB demographic. Most of them are probably going to come from the subcontinent. They're going to have an IT background. We've been living on the company tit for the last 2 years or 3 years with COVID.
Yeah.
Federal government, doesn't matter which one's in, needs to increase tax revenue. The only way to get them to come in, earn more money, we've got a low unemployment, and they can get the ass taxed out of them like we are too.
Yeah, and look, the governments are addicted to immigration. It's a great tax grab, So
mate, it's a nice, neat, clean industry, isn't it?
And also too, just another interesting thing to think about too, back in those days, between 1970 and 1980, there's only about 2 or 3 banks in the marketplace offering finance, and you had to go there with cap in hand virtually, you know, put on your best Sunday suit and have everything absolutely squeaky clean. And if you're lucky, you might just get a loan. Whereas today, markets, the market's opened up and there's probably 32, 33, 30 odd lenders that you can go. So, you know, they've got far greater accessibility to credit.
The other thing that annoys me a bit about when we talk about this, they always compare Australian inflation compared to US inflation. Now, most Americans take out a 30-year fixed mortgage.
Correct.
Exactly. We're lucky if we have 5-year fixed. So inflation and Reserve Bank policy directly affects us. Most people in the US don't give a fat rat's clacker because their mortgage isn't greatly affected. Yeah, the price of gas, price of fuel, price of food increases, but their mortgage isn't changing over a 30-year period.
The repayments don't change, whereas at the moment, you know, $200, $300, $400 a month, $500 a month increases on mortgage repayments to what they were, you know, 6 months ago. So
absolutely. Now, if we just look at basic economics, if we've got more people coming in, we've had builders going broke, and there's argument that there's going to be more going broke.
A lot more.
There's less supply coming into the market. So if we have less supply and the price of construction has to increase, which it has, so your price to replace, and this is motor vehicles during COVID, right? The price to replace has gone up. There has to be an increase in value, surely.
It has to be dragged along because the demand will still be there, but there'll be less volumes available. So I think that, you know, yes, we might have a little bit of a bit of pushback at the moment, but I don't think it's going to be that as great. This is my personal opinion. Again, it's not advice, but this is my personal opinion. I don't think the demand will still be strong, and I think that you'll find that property values will bounce back quickly, very quickly. See, if we go back, just to go back to my my research, if we go back to 1980, we had interest rates around about what were they, bit over 9%. In 1980, inflation was about 10. Then we go forward another 10 years to 1990, and I hope we're all sitting down. The variable interest rate for the average home loan was 17%.
Absolutely. And I know for a fact there was people fixing then at 20 because they couldn't afford it to go any higher.
Absolutely. So 17%. So now in that 10-year period, it went from 10 to 17%, and property prices more than doubled.
Well, let's put that in perspective. What did you say the house? Oh, I took a note when you said 184 grand. Was that right? Roughly.
In 1990, 184,000 for the average home. This is in Sydney. So we went far behind that.
So in today's terms, let's put that in perspective. That's the equivalent of having a $184,000 credit card.
Yeah. Exactly. So, you know, so the point is that, you know, over that 20-year period, we had, you know, huge inflation, huge mortgage rate increases. And property prices actually went through the roof. It did the opposite.
Well, I think the frustrating thing for me is they're talking about everybody who loses money out of property. Now, predominantly the people who do at this point are the ones who have to sell or choose to sell. Now, if you're at the bottom part and you're under mortgage stress, you've got to sell, right? But there's also a decrease in median price because they're saying a lot of people that are, you know, in the multi-million dollar properties, they're actually sell out to make a slight loss because they're going to overcapitalize in their further investment they're going to make as a net result of it. And they're in a better cash flow position, aren't they? You know, absolutely right.
But I think the thing is that you know, if we go back to the start of COVID, you know, there was the same predictions. We're going to have this massive property value drop, and again, the opposite happened. I think the property market's been very resilient, very strong. Demand is just going to get. I think, as the point you made before, builders going broke, less new dwellings being built. It's just going to create a supply, issue. So so demand supply will come out of kilter. So I think it's an opportunity. I really do. I think it's, you know, if you have the ability to look at property as an investment option, I think it's an opportunity.
Well, and I also think the apartment market, which has probably been smashed the most over this COVID period, is probably starting to come back. Now, there's an article I'm just going to reference slightly, and I'm not going to say who it's from, but it's if you Google it, it's on there. It's on by one of the big two real estate providers, so you can probably work out which one it might be. They're saying across capital cities, demand has decreased for houses by 32.6% and units by 27.7% compared to the peak of demand in March last year. Now, that's all well and good. What that actually says to me, though, is there's a slightly more increase in unit demand than there is in apartment demand. But why, and in the world that we're in, we've got to compare apples for apples, right? Why are we comparing the peak of the market in March, summer, compared to footy time? We've had, you're a Collingwood supporter, you're out getting pissed on the weekend. You weren't sitting there going, oh, I might go and buy a property.
Or go and open for inspection on Saturday
seriously,
afternoon.
What a stupid time or a line to compare the data to.
Well, and also too is that there is, I've been speaking to a couple of agents and they're saying to me that the stock is really low as well. So there's not a lot of people, wanting to sell at the moment because of what's happening, which is fair enough. Sell either. So there's not a lot of stock around. So, the change of properties isn't happening as much because it's just one of the reasons is also, availability of stock.
Correct.
Whereas if you go back a year ago, there's a lot of changing of house, changeovers of houses, happening a hell of a lot than what it is today. So I think that, I reckon, the next 6 months presents a great opportunity. I really do.
Well, and let's take all the bullshit out of it. The state government cannot afford people not to buy property because they rely on stamp duty to help balance the books.
Absolutely. It's a massive windfall for them, isn't it?
Well, I'm glad you used that term, like windfall. There's something else that come through in COVID as well, which is windfall tax. You want to tell us a bit about windfall tax?
Well, that's right. Well, windfall tax, is basically if your property gets rezoned from say most people see it as from a rural perspective. So you've got like 100 acres on the boundary of Melbourne, and it gets rezoned from rural to resi zoning. Then obviously it's a massive windfall to the owner. Basically the government have brought in this windfall tax where basically they take 50% of that windfall. And look, there's a lot of argument on both sides. They've made a massive, huge amount of money. So why shouldn't they be putting more money into the coffers? So not here to argue that one. But where it's really interesting is that if you've got a house in, say, I don't know, Northcote, and your house zoning is zone, 3, for example, it might mean that only one dwelling can be built in that block. And all of a sudden it gets zoned to zone 1 because the local government wants more housing in that municipality. And let's say it can go from 1 dwelling to 100 dwellings apartment block. Well, due to your new zoning, you've received a windfall because your house is now worth a lot more than it was as a zone 3.
Absolutely.
And that mum and dad is going to be up for a 50% tax on the increase of the value of the house.
Now, what we're not saying that this is set in stone, whatever. You got to seek your own independent taxation advice around this.
Absolutely.
But again, let's come back to basic economics, right? You're the developer. You now have an increased tax burden put upon you. Are you going to make less profit?
Absolutely. Of course you are.
Right. There's one way that you can now try to recoup some of that profit, and that is to increase your prices. Who pays for that?
The end user.
And guess what?
That
also increases on the value of property.
Exactly. And another thing too also, not only, there's that point. And the other point also is that if you're a developer and a land banker to create more housing for the for that particular part of where you live, why would you do it in Melbourne now?
Absolutely.
You'd go straight to Sydney or Queensland where there's none of this windfall tax. So that's going to create another issue
shrinkage
of less land available to put more pressure on housing, which is going to create more pressure on prices.
Correct. Well,
it's amazing. It's amazing how often the government fiddle with the edges, and there's massive unintended consequences in this.
Oh, absolutely. And look, they talk about the market being smart and the market being dynamic. The market's smart. The people who try to regulate it sometimes aren't. That's the issue. Now, with the windfall tax, again, it's easy for us in Geelong because that's where they use the Geelong as a case study for windfall tax. They believe by the implementation of this, it's going to increase the lot price per subdivision by about $26,000.
Right. Okay.
So guess what? If I've bought it last year for X now I'm paying X plus 26.
Exactly right.
Doesn't matter who gets it. There's an
Yep.
increase in value.
It just gets passed down. It's the same a couple of years ago when they brought in, they had a government initiative where for first home buyers, they're giving, from memory, it was around $40,000.
Yeah, if they built. Yep.
If they build a new home.
Yep.
Well, guess what happened to the price of new homes? It went up by $40,000.
That's mind-boggling.
So yeah, the developer just wins. And another thing also too, I was thinking about over the weekend, because there's a big development down the road from my place.
Yep.
They have a lot of they treat new housing development, the developers, a bit like the diamond industry. So there's a lot of stock available.
Yep.
They only release little bits at a time to keep a floor in the price. And that's part of the problem, you know.
Yep.
So when governments think, oh, we'll open up more land.
Yep.
The bigger problem is that the developer, they're smart. They're saying, okay, yeah, great, we'll open up more land, but this week all that's available is 10 lots. That's
correct. Correct.
And nothing's going to be left available until those 10 lots are sold.
Oh.
So it creates this this market, this false kind of demand. So that's a problem in itself. That there might be sort of 1,000 lots available, but only 10 or 20 getting released at a time.
Absolutely right. And I think the other thing, when you spoke about interest rates, that also plays into the pricing, because there's very few land or apartment developers who pay cash for these things. Most of them are on borrowed money, right?
Absolutely. No.
Now, you and I both do some investments for clients in balance sheet lending with another institution who I might be getting on in a couple of weeks to do a podcast, but we'll speak about them when we speak about them. But we know these developers are now paying in the vicinity of 7 to 10%.
Absolutely. Yes.
So again, that just gets passed downhill, right?
It all does. It all does. So but I suppose the main point of today's discussion was just about how yes, property prices have come off a little bit, but it's not all doom and gloom. Yes, interest rates are going up, and I think as you said earlier, going real hard real early is going to create, I think, a bit of a stalling in the economy.
Yep.
Again, it's just my opinion, but I just feel that's how it's going to look like to me.
Yep.
And then I think that after every interest rate rise or rising cycle, there's an interest rate reduction cycle. Yep. So I suggest that most from people I've been speaking to and listening to, the expectation is sort of like late 23, 24, we can start seeing some interest rate relief.
Yep.
And if that happens, and you got massive migration coming, I think this sends the message that property values will get fired up again. So
and in the meantime, what this is also doing, and no one's discussed this at any level, especially the newspapers, rents have to increase.
No, well, yeah, and I think they are. Right now, there is a big demand on rents. Like I think vacancy rates are at an all-time low. So again, supply and demand is what drives markets.
Absolutely. Well, I've had some clients who've just sold a home in Geelong. They were on a 90-day settlement. They are in. They've gone flat out for 6 weeks, and they have a not a large. They got a larger than the normal family today, but not a massive family, and they are finding it exceptionally difficult to try to find a rental property.
Yeah. So, I'd believe that. I mean, I'm hearing that there's at rental open for inspections. There's many applicants that come in for every property. Yep.
So again, scarcity of supply increases return, right? But again, speak to your own specialist to get specific advice about that. Now, on the mortgage side of things, are you getting many people asking you about fixed rates at the moment?
I am, but look, the horse is bolted on that one. It's too late, because the fixed rates, they're in the fives now, well and truly in the fives. So by the time you come to that 2-year period, your variable rate will be just maybe touching 5 itself. So you're paying, high rates for nothing, because banks look with fixed rates, banks never lose, and I've never met anyone really who ever wins out of fixed rates.
Yep.
So I think that it's bolted. And just actually, while we bring up rates, one of the other issues with property at the moment is because of banks doing their they add in on their buffer. It's sort of between 3 and 3.5% on top of the variable rate. So
this is their stress test they do.
Correct. So if you go back, say 6-8 months ago, 9 months ago, when rates were around 2%, they'd throw their stress test of 3.5 on 2. So your stress test of 5.5. Now your stress test at 7.5.
Wow.
So at the moment, it's more difficult to get the money you need to buy the house you want to buy because of the stress testing. So that's a little bit of a liquidity issue at the moment. Getting the money, not enough money in the market. I think that as rates come back, when they do turn, that'll right itself.
So that's when we hear about people talk about their borrowing capacity. So technically, if you've been looking for property for the last 6 months, you can actually borrow less today than you could 6 months ago.
Exactly right. It's exactly right. So and just the stress testing in banks, just adding their 3 to 3.5 buffer. Some go 3, some go 3.5, depends on who they are. So just making sure that it's good practice to make sure that new borrowers can actually afford if rates do get high. That is at the moment, I think that's probably one of the biggest issues. With going to market, you just don't have the money in your pocket that you had 6 months ago.
And that's on principal place of residence, right? So on investment property, it's worse, I believe.
It's even worse. That's right. Well, the rates are higher straight away. So, an investment property rate versus an owner-occupied property rate would probably be around about 0.5% roughly.
Okay. And in the old days, investors used to do interest only. Do they still do that, or are they more interest in principal now?
Oh, I think it depends on your tax position. So it just depends on whether I think people are in a higher tax rates, getting some really good deductible expenses on their income. So interest only could suit really well for them, whereas others like the idea of paying down some debt and getting some equity built up from day one. It's horses for courses.
Which again confirms everything that we can talk about where we go speak to a specialist, because there's not one shoe fits all, doesn't it? It's so different.
No, I agree. So I think there's so many different options that we've got, and so it's it'll be interesting where these rates end up anyway. So
absolutely. So headwinds, we think there's going to be a bit more stress in the market for increase in rates.
Yes, definitely. I think that from what you hear, that there's going to be maybe 2 to 3 more rate rises this year, and maybe 2 to 3 next year. So what you said earlier, going too hard too early, it's just got that feel all about it, hasn't it?
Absolutely right. But tailwinds, we're coming into spring. There's always more supply into the market. People always feel better. They just generally feel better. And what's really interesting, to completely digress, if we talk about COVID, when we talk about where COVID really kicked off worse, it kicked off in all these countries in winter. That's the thing, it's a worse environment. Comes to summer, everybody feels better, blah, blah. Our market generally performs better as well. As a farmer, you're a farmer have a background as well. Like, we produce in spring and summer. There's more money in the economy, people do more, stateless savings, blah, blah, blah. So there's always that to look forward to as well. If we've got positive immigration coming in, and that just leads to opportunity, I think.
And I think also too, everything goes in cycles. So nothing goes up in a straight line, and everything in this world is
taxes do.
It's true. Death and taxes.
Death and taxes. That's right.
Oh yeah, but everything's very cyclical in life, and I think that you just got to batten down the hatches. And just hang in there. And as I say, ignore the noise and stick to the plan.
Absolutely. Stick fat, right? That's basically what it comes down to. Make sure you speak to a specialist, and make sure you make a judgmental decision that's going to suit you and your circumstances.
And also, to another interesting thing as well, was that I remember years ago I went to a seminar with a large institution, and they made a very good point about the doomsdayers of property. They write up the articles in the papers. All of them seem to be fund managers from either industry super funds or retail super funds. They're always written by the guys like what's his name, Oliver from AMP.
Shane Oliver.
Shane Oliver, those sorts of people who have a vested interest. For people not to invest in property, because they want money in their super funds.
Absolutely.
Or in the investment funds. So they've got so it's amazing how they went through about 20 articles, and every one of them was just doomsday about property, and written by either an industry super fund expert, retail super fund expert.
Well, I think that's going to lead us on to another topic as well, when we talk about residential versus commercial real estate as well, because and we won't even talk about industrial, but there's such a difference in resi and commercial.
Well, that's right. So at the moment with industry booming, there's a big demand for commercial space.
Absolutely. And generally, you're really broad brush overview. You got a tenant for longer, they cover your outgoings, blah, blah, blah. Where residential, you generally, as a general rule of thumb, again, you get a higher yield, there's a bit more transactional cost, but, the tenant pays for their own expenses, blah, 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 but you still pay your rates, blah, blah, blah. So again, which way is best? Generally, it's a combination of both, and that's where you need to speak to a specialist.
Yeah, exactly. So no, it'll be interesting to see over the next, probably 2 years to see where this all sits. Yeah, well, when the dust settles,
yep,
where it lies.
Awesome. Now, as we did in our last one, which we bugged up, which is why we're doing this again today. When we catch up next, we're going to talk about what's the difference between owning the bank or putting your money in the bank.
Yeah, great topic.
Not that we want to bash the banks, look, but it's a pretty easy concept. But the biggest advantage we have is we have such a stable, secure banking system. So we haven't been affected as badly as some of the rest of the places in the world.
Haven't experienced anything like it.
Absolutely. Mate, awesome. Steve, thank you for your time.
No, all good.
I'll look forward to catching up next time.
Me too.
Cheers, mate. Take care.